Well, Richard, as you said, the headline was that the U.S. is the only country to lose trust in all four major institutions: business, government, media, NGOs, in the past year. How do you explain what seems to be pervasive, just cynicism?
I think Americans are in a very manic phase. I think that we're doubting ourselves in a serious way. There was such hope for the president, perhaps unrealistic expectation. And there's also very fundamental belief in business and its ability. And yet this year, business really stumbled. So I don't think anybody sort of knew who to turn to. You know, they're screwing up, you know, I've just lost my 401k value by half. I mean, there's some sense of reaching for straws, and it's frustration.
Right.
I mean, remember that the US GNP grew 3%, trust went up in markets, in business like for Spain, I mean, you know, with catastrophic economies.
Right.
So business sort of did it to itself to a certain extent. And so did government by, you know, consistently punching with business. The expectations game also plays in this. We're sort of like a team that's underperforming, and you know you can be better.
Jeff, one thing Richard described was a big reversal in the elements of corporate reputation, right?
If we look at the countries and institutions in those countries which have scored higher, it doesn't mean that they are scandal-free, and their scandals might be equally or more persuasive and pervasive, but you don't hear about them. To get Chinese audiences, Chinese CEOs, and even Chinese journalists to be critical of certain business practices, we have to, and they insist on it, surrendering not just Western companies, but U.S. companies as the foil. Mm-hmm. When they will tell us during the breaks and all the rest that the far more egregious conduct is in the domestic anchored companies, we can't talk about it. That's a problem. So for U.S. executives to wrestle through it, the recipe we would usually have is, and as Richard talked about it, is transparency. The dirty little secret, as I'm often asked with boards in crises right now, isn't there an argument in favor of stonewalling? I happen to be opposed to it like most everybody, if not literally everybody in this room. We do have still some residual CEOs across cultures that resent what is the obvious now intertwined, inextricably intertwined roles of substance and symbolism. Right. Words matter.
I mean, when you think about Goldman Sachs, what happened there? Why are they getting pounded so mercilessly?
During the financial crisis, Goldman, along with everybody else, absolutely in that crisis moment needed a bailout. They would have gone broke. Since that day, they have refused to admit that. I think people are still residually hammering on Goldman for that. When everybody else is getting destroyed, nobody loves the winner, and they're the winner.
Right.
Like the rest of Wall Street, they could have not bet the firm by sailing the ship through the North Atlantic with no radar at 50 knots with 2,000 people on board. Right. I mean, you look at Wall Street, it's like, why do people have no trust in banks? Right. Because best case scenario, the CEOs were completely incompetent. Right. No wonder people don't trust banks.
Right. There was no industry that was more hammered for incompetence than the car guys.
Right.
And yet suddenly, in 2 years, comes back. Right. So is it new products? Is it management that's changed? Is it the IPO of GM? What isn't it in the financial industry? Do you really see a very different business model? The bonus thing still is really lightning.
General Motors, we went in, we fired management, we put the company through a prepackaged bankruptcy, we fixed a lot of the issues, and now what's coming out is actually a good, normal bankruptcy process. This is what the laws are supposed to do. With Wall Street, we went in and said, we have got to save you. And we're not going to fire anybody. And you know what? We can't not give you the bonuses because then you would leave. And we own you now. So take the money. We'll preserve all the equity holders, bond holders, the dummies who lent you all that money. You guys have to be protected 100 cents on the dollar or the world will end. No wonder people hate the banks.
Well, but it goes back to transparency. I mean, they're in the auto industry, there's starting to be a level of transparency. We know what they're doing. We know they're producing vehicles that we want. In the banking industry, there's absolutely no confidence that they're doing anything that we really want.
The year 2000 suddenly, created a $600 trillion industry that is based on nothingness. Whereas with General Motors, we have something tangible. So there's a real product there.
The bedrock of American society has always been the middle class, and if we continue to have this sense that we're shrinking, that our children aren't going to be able to be better off than we are, then we'll continue on this decline.
Well, is that a fair way to characterize these findings in a large sense? That in the countries with rapid economic growth, bright prospects, trust is generally pretty high.
You should take a look at Germany as an outlier the other way. Yes, it's true that their economy is good, and that's why trust is up in business. That is fair. But there are also markets in which economic performance is not so hot, where trust in business rose this year.
As we get into the question of how companies should respond, or media or whatever, frankly, is there an argument for just kind of waiting it out, because these things jump up and down quite dramatically? Maybe the mood could simply change.
We actually now believe we've come to a place where trust is transformed, that the shock of 2008 was so substantial that companies have to behave differently, meaning they have to, the performance and purpose, no longer just a shareholder model. Right. We also think the how has changed, because it is this need for transparency on how you make money. It is the public's right to know, not just what the ingredients are, but what your business model is. And further, the where. That whole idea of the media cloverleaf, that you've got to be in all four quadrants, that you can't just roll the CEO out to talk to the New York Times and whatnot, that a lot of people get their information from HuffPo or from Facebook or whatever, and they have a need to know. If you don't fill that information gap, you will have it filled by others.
These hired counterfeits, as person on the street, as your data shows, is not such a convincing testimonial anymore. We're looking for the branding of sources.
And it has to be an academic.
The academic figures rank at the top.
Number one.
Number one most
but
trusted
also,
figures.
Jeff, now a technical expert from within the company.
So you think shared fate would be the way to go? There's no way anybody was going to jump on board with Toyota, and certainly with BP, as Hayward was going out of his way with poisonous relations in the industry. People stepped back and were pointing them, they're isolating them. So I don't think we see shared fate.
But
as
Jeff,
an
here's
easy-
the thing, if you're the lead brand in your category, you have to lead.
Transparency is a state of mind, and it's not something you do once and then don't do it next. It's got to be consistent, which I'm assuming is the advice you're giving your clients. And yes, you're going to have people who are going to be skeptical, but if you do it over a long period of time, that skepticism will be muted.
But also, I think it's actually something structural within the organization, such that marketing, communications, public affairs all have to come to a place and
same message.
sit at the table. And beyond the same message, it's the policy.
Yeah.
It's what are we going to do here?
You're starting to see in big corporations, and they're leading the way, and I think that's really key, because these are good people. They're producing great products. They're going to be here for a long period of time, and they're thinking long term.
The big thing that most companies are not taking advantage of today that they should be is this ability to go direct. And I don't mean go direct just on the website of BP, but you know what? If Tony Hayward or anybody else wants to write an editorial, we will publish it instantly. It's fine.
We'll publish it using the same tools that we use for our own stuff. The same search tools, the same social tools. So you're going to get the same exposure to the tools. And to make that leap from covering an event or interviewing a person to that person speaking directly, that's the key to being effective in social news.
In light of the data that Richard has explained to us, what's the main thing you think companies should be doing that is probably different from what they're doing right at this moment?
Taking advantage of the new tools available to you to address concerns, shape the conversation, and so forth. That does not mean that the old media relationships are worthless. They are not. But you now have a whole bunch of new tools, including with sites like ours, Huffington Post, and others, Facebook, everything else. Learn to use them, because they're extraordinarily powerful.
And learning how to speak directly to your constituents is a must. You have to do it, and that's going to inform the future of your company.
I think statistic I heard yesterday about the audience on HuffPost will guide you. That 1/3 of the people go direct, 1/3 of the people go through search, and 1/3 of the people come through Facebook and Twitter. You must have embassies on Facebook and Twitter if you're a smart corporation, because you are missing 1/3 of your audience if you do not.
Every page, every slide up there, Richard, is quite powerful. Very few institutions these days understand the significance of what's in Richard's data, or the Edelman data, which is that the boss's brand really matters. Coming out of your data, that means that we just defer to them in a monarchic way, that have this dynastic rule, we rein them in, they get mad and leave. You know, how do we not make drones out of these colorful personalities we need?
Henry, Eric, Jeff, thank you, and Richard, especially thank you for bringing all of us together.
Thanks.